What's up guys, Tommy Bowie here from Movie Rewind, and I cannot believe that the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who is in less than a month. That is just insane. You know, it feels like 5 minutes ago we were watching Jodie Whittaker's final episode as the 13th Doctor, and now within a few weeks we're going to see David Tennant as the 14th Doctor. And I have to admit, I've not been this excited for Doctor Who since Series 10 was released in 2017, so it's fair to say I'm very excited. And I thought, as it's the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who, I would try to do a special Doctor Who themed video, and that's when I decided about a year ago that I would plan a series of Doctor Who. Now, what I mean by that is I've seen quite a few videos on YouTube in the past of people saying what they would do if they were the showrunner of Doctor Who. And I always feel like they never used to go in depth enough. So I decided, you know what? I'll throw my hat into the ring and I will plan a full series of Doctor Who, including an incarnation of the Doctor, a companion, as well as 13 episodes and a Christmas special. So I went all out on this, and this took me about 10 months to plan. You know, I kept kind of going back to the drawing board and trying again, coming up with like a series arc and individual episodes and things like that. And I have to say, I am pretty happy with the results, but I do have to stress that this was purely done for fun. This is not my audition to be showrunner of Doctor Who, because I'm not a writer, I'm not a producer, so I've just planned this series as a bit of fun to help celebrate the 60th anniversary of Doctor Who, a show which I am very passionate about and have watched since the revival in 2005. So I really do hope you enjoyed this video, and please feel free to comment what you would do with Doctor Who if you were showrunner, and also if you think that this series is actually any good, or you think it's as bad as Chris Chibnall's tenure, because, you know, that'd be a low blow if it's worse than Chris Chibnall's, I have to admit. I've called it the Green series because green is my favourite colour, so without further ado, let's get into it. So I've called my incarnation of the Doctor the Green Doctor purely because, you know, it's the Green series, so I'll call him the Green Doctor. And I would have the Green Doctor be more alien. He'd be an incarnation of the Doctor much like the 12th Doctor, in the sense that he is very alien. He struggles to interact with human beings. He doesn't like small talk a lot at all. In terms of his physical appearance, his outfit, I would have him wearing smart shirts, occasionally t-shirts, a plain cardigan, black fingerless gloves and a black overcoat. Now, the black fingerless gloves, kind of like the 11th Doctor's bow tie or the 10th Doctor's shoes, the black fingerless gloves would be the kind of niche thing which the Green Doctor would have. In terms of his personality, I'd have him as a more quiet and reserved character. I would also have him quote movie trivia quite a lot, so I suppose he'd be quite a geeky incarnation of the Doctor. In terms of his humour, I'd have him have a sarcastic sense of humour, and once again, I should reiterate, he'd be very awkward in social interactions, but he does have a very methodical mind, and that means that he plans his actions in detail, so he might give off the impression of being quite a geeky, clumsy Doctor, but in reality, he's very methodical and he's usually one step ahead of his enemies at all times. His first companion would be paramedic Jar Jar Meadows. I will go into her, the details of her in a little bit, but basically he invites her on the TARDIS because he feels responsible for the death of her husband, so the Doctor decides to invite her onto the TARDIS to just so she can enjoy her life and make him feel less guilty. And in terms of their relationship, I would have it as a brother and sister relationship. I would not have a flirtatious relationship or kind of a will they won't they romance. I'd much prefer a brother-sister style relationship between the Doctor and companion. They might argue a lot, but they still care about each other's well-being. So that is the Green Doctor, a very geeky incarnation of the Doctor who you can tell is an alien and not a human. Now, this is some initial concept art I did just to get my head in the game. The outfit has remained mostly the same. The only thing I decided to remove was the scarf because I just felt it looked a bit too busy in terms of an outfit. So I went for a more simpler design. But I was a massive fan of the fingerless gloves. For some reason, I just think that it looks very quirky, and I think it would suit this more geeky incarnation of the Doctor. So yeah, that's some initial concept art. Now the companion, and I've called her Jar Jar Meadows. She would be a 35-year-old paramedic living in Lincoln who has been married to fellow paramedic Daniel Meadows for the past 2 years. She's an intelligent, capable and compassionate woman. She always wants to see the good in people, and she will always support the weakest person in the room. So that's the kind of person she is. She'll always try and put other people first, especially if they come across as less confident than she is. The character would first encounter the Doctor when the newly regenerated Green Doctor crash lands his TARDIS near the ambulance she is travelling in with her husband Daniel, and she doesn't really know what to make of him at first. Now Daniel is killed at the climax of the first episode while both Jar Jar and Daniel are trying to help the Doctor defeat a threat. Now Jar Jar is devastated. Daniel was her world. Not only was he her husband, but they were also very close work colleagues as well. So she really struggles to deal with her grief over losing Daniel. Now she's invited into the TARDIS by the Doctor in an attempt for him to kind of get over the guilt he feels over Daniel's death. But Jar Jar uses travelling with the Doctor as a way to kind of neglect her grief. She doesn't want to confront the reality of a life without Daniel, so she's decided, she's done with it. She wants to travel with the Doctor as a form of escapism. And I think that would be kind of the main character arc for Jar Jar in this series. It would be having to face up to the reality of Daniel's death. And actually, the final scenes of this series, you would see Jar Jar finally decide that, she loved Daniel, but it's time to face the reality. It's time to move on. And her and the Doctor would scatter Daniel's ashes, which I think would just be a really nice end to the series to kind of show viewers that, grief is a very strange thing and humans never really know how to deal with the loss of someone they love. But it shows that eventually you can move on, and it's right to move on in order to carry on with your life. So yeah, that would be the companion, Jar Jar Meadows, a paramedic who is a very capable, intelligent and compassionate woman. Now, as I said, the Doctor and Jar Jar's main character arcs this series would actually be surrounding around grief. Jar Jar is travelling with the Doctor because she doesn't want to face the reality of life without Daniel. She'll put herself in danger quite a bit because she doesn't really care if she lives or dies now. She is so consumed with grief that all she wants to do is forget that Daniel is dead, and just kind of live in denial. And the Doctor's not really helping. Like, he's trying to help because he thinks by travelling with him, he'll be able to bring Jar Jar happiness again. But in reality, all he is doing is trying to cover up his own guilt because Daniel dies helping the Doctor. So the Doctor, of course, is very guilty, and that's his motive for allowing Jar Jar to travel with him in the TARDIS. So this entire series would be about both the Doctor and Jar Jar kind of dealing in the aftermath of Daniel's death and trying to overcome the grief and guilt which they both feel regarding that man's death. Now, the main story arc for the series, because of course every Doctor Who series should have a story arc, a series arc which goes through the series. Now, I would actually have it based on a sea devil, a lone survivor of a colony of sea devils called Anir. Now, I will go into this when I go over the episodes, but basically, Anir's colony is destroyed by humans, and he has a deep resentment against the human race, and that's when he comes up with this master plan to wipe out humanity, but kind of by using their own defense system against them. Now, it might sound very confusing at the moment, I'm not going to lie, it is quite confusing, but when I've gone through the episodes, it should make a bit more sense. But yeah, the main series arc for this series would revolve around a lone survivor from a colony of sea devils seeking revenge against humanity. And here's just some more images I did of the Green Doctor. Obviously, I couldn't actually afford a model, so I had to do it myself. So I do apologise for that. But as you can see, that's what the Green Doctor would look like. You know, he'd have his cardigan, his fingerless gloves. And I've also done it where he'd be wearing a shirt, and in another one he'd be wearing a t-shirt to kind of show the difference I would have. But I'd have quite a simplistic look for the Doctor, at least. Now, we get into the episodes. Now, episode 1, I'd have it as an extended episode because it's the Green Doctor's first story. I would call it High Voltage. And basically what this revolves around is the Doctor coming into contact with Jar Jar and Daniel. It would introduce those 3 characters and kind of develop them so you kind of understand their personalities and what they stand for. Now, the main threat of the episode I would have as kind of this electricity creature. It's unknown where this creature comes from. It's just a being of pure electricity. And the creature, you know, it doesn't really have any motive apart from the fact that it's just kind of killing people because it's made of electricity. And I would have it be defeated at a power station. Basically, what the Doctor would do is he would trick the creature into absorbing more electricity than it could handle. So basically, you would overload this creature to the point that it explodes. But the main problem of when they do confront the creature is that Daniel would die. Because he would die in the process because he would be trying to help the Doctor defeat this creature, and in the process he would be electrocuted and would be killed. So that's kind of the main climax of this episode, the fact that Daniel is killed by this creature, and the Doctor feels incredibly guilty because, of course, Jar Jar and Daniel were trying to help him defeat this threat. So that's why the Green Doctor decides, once he runs into Jar Jar again, when she's collected her husband's ashes, he decides to offer her a trip in the TARDIS. You know, just one trip to help her forget about her grief. And Jar Jar literally bites his hand off, agrees to go, and leaves the ashes behind as if she's running away from her grief. So yeah, that would be the end of the first episode. So yeah, I would have it as kind of an episode which focuses more on the characters than the threat. Like, the threat is there in this electricity creature, but I think it's more important to kind of develop the characters first so viewers get to know them. Now, the second episode, I would have it as a historical episode. I've called it The Alien with the Lamp, and that's because it would focus on Florence Nightingale. Now, the Doctor takes Jar Jar back in time to meet Florence Nightingale because Jar Jar classifies Nightingale as one of her heroes because Nightingale was, of course, a woman right at the centre of medicine back in the 19th and 20th centuries. So, of course, she's going to be very interested to kind of get to know this incredible woman. But once they land at St. Thomas Hospital, the Doctor notices that a number of patients are being admitted with alien DNA in their system. And basically what this is, the main threat of the episode, is there's a sole survivor of an alien race known as the Lovak, and they have infiltrated the hospital. And what they are trying to do is they are trying to slowly convert human patients into Lovaks in hopes of kind of increasing the chances of the Lovaks surviving and not going extinct. So it would be one of those things where the aliens' motives are actually, you can kind of be sympathetic because they're trying to prevent their species from going extinct. But of course, in order to do that, they are, you know, taking humans against their will and turning them into their own kind. So I think the theme of this episode would just be to develop the rapport between the Doctor and Jar Jar, kind of show that brother-sister relationship that they would begin to have. I think Florence Nightingale would be a good historical figure to feature in this episode, and I think Nightingale would have to work with the Doctor and Jar Jar in order to uncover the Lovax plan. So I just think as a historical episode, it has a strong historical figure, which I think many people know who Florence Nightingale is, but they might not really know what she's famous for. So I think an episode set in a hospital would really show, how important Nightingale's work was in medicine. So yeah, that would be the second episode. Now, the third episode, and of course, every series of the modern era has a Dalek episode, so I've decided to do a Dalek episode as well. I've called it Prisoner of the Daleks, and I would actually have it focused on Davros more than the Daleks, because I feel like Davros is a figure who, in the modern era at least, there's not much focus on him, and yet he is the creator of the Daleks. Now, what I would have is actually the Daleks have turned against Davros. Even though he is their creator, they've held him in prison rather than exterminating him, because they can't actually exterminate him because, of course, he's their creator. But they've decided that they can't really trust Davros, and he is not pure enough to really be seen in the Daleks' master race themselves. So this would be kind of a prison break episode where the Doctor has to reluctantly try and get Davros out of this prison, because Davros has basically said, if you help me escape this prison, then I will show you how to destroy the Daleks once and for all. So obviously the Doctor is never going to refuse the potential for the Daleks to be wiped out of existence, because obviously the Doctor knows how much problems the Daleks have caused. So I would say the episode would take inspiration from prison break films or heist films, as the Doctor is forced to break into a secure prison on the Daleks' homeworld of Skaro in order to free Davros. And as I said, the Doctor knows that it might be a potential trap, but he can't give up the opportunity to prevent the Daleks from causing any more destruction. Although in the end, Davros is freed by the Doctor. He betrays him. He manages to escape without revealing his secrets. So the Doctor, of course, is very frustrated because, he went to all this effort to help Davros escape the Dalek homeworld, and yet Davros has just left him in the lurch without revealing the secrets. So Davros was just using the Doctor for his own benefits. So yeah, that's what I would have as a Dalek story in this episode. Obviously, every series of the modern era has had Daleks in some capacity, so I don't think the Green series should be any different. Now, episode 4 is the first part of a 2-part story, and this would revolve around the Sea Devils. Now, I've called it Enemy of the Sea. Now, basically, I think the Sea Devils are a great Doctor Who villain. And I don't think that, as we saw in the 13th Doctor story, I don't think the Sea Devils were done justice in that episode. So I've decided to have this one focus on humanity and how just how they don't care about the environment whatsoever, and how this would affect, the Sea Devils if they existed. So the Doctor and Jar Jar land on an underwater Arctic oil base in the year 1988, and it's under siege from a small settlement of Sea Devils. Now, the reason the Sea Devils are attacking this oil base is because as the humans are drilling for oil, that is slowly destroying their home. So the Sea Devils are actually acting in self-defense. They're not in the wrong in this episode, and the Doctor knows that. Now, the Doctor is a very non-violent figure. He's trying to find a peaceful solution to the problems, so that the humans and Sea Devils can kind of sit around a table and work out a compromise. But obviously, the humans don't want that. The humans, especially those in charge of this oil base, are just there to mine oil, and they are not afraid of killing Sea Devils in order to get it. So I think that this would be a really good theme to kind of touch on the environmental damage which can be caused by drilling for oil. And in terms of the atmosphere of this episode, I'd have it be quite claustrophobic and tense, as the Doctor is frantically trying to prevent both sides from resorting to violent tactics. But of course, in the next episode, which I've referred to as Revenge from the Deep. This would be when negotiations between the humans and Sea Devils break down, and the Sea Devils decide that it's time to take revenge on the crew. They want all the humans on that crew dead. And as we would see, Jar Jar would actually befriend a young Sea Devil named Anir, who you wouldn't know at the end of this episode, but he would actually be the lone survivor of the Sea Devils, because this episode would end by the humans deciding to blow up the base. You know, the Doctor manages to save them, but the humans decide to self-destruct the base before they leave against the Doctor's orders, in order to kind of take revenge on the Sea Devils for the crew which were killed by the Sea Devils earlier in the episode. So in many ways, this episode would kind of be the wrong people survived. The humans that survived, they're not saints, you know, that they were drilling for oil. They refused to negotiate with the Sea Devils, and the Sea Devils are simply just trying to protect their home. And the humans retaliate by blowing up the base and, of course, killing all of the Sea Devils and their colony as well. So I think it would be one of those episodes which kind of shows how just humans are very selfish people. You know, they're a very selfish species, and they don't care about how much damage they do to the environment. In terms of the tone of this episode, it would be a disaster movie. The Sea Devils are trying to kill the humans, and one of the ways of doing that is obviously by destroying the base. So obviously the base would be filling up with water, and the Doctor would kind of have to try and rescue the humans before the entire base goes under and they all drown. And obviously I would also have Jar Jar nearly sacrificed herself in order to save some of the crew, and her actions on the base would finally make it clear to the Doctor that she's not coping with the death of Daniel, and she's taking stupid risks in order to make sure that others survive. So that would be the Doctor kind of realising that Jar Jar is not coping with Daniel's death whatsoever. Now, the 6th episode I would call Swarm. Now, this is a kind of a breather compared to, quite a tense two-parter that preceded it. I would have the Doctor take Jar Jar to the Norfolk countryside in the year 1550 because he really wants to have a serious conversation with her about her grief and how she's not coping with it. But obviously this would be quickly overshadowed by a mysterious swarm which is slowly making its way through the small countryside population and killing them instantly. Now, the swarm would actually be a form of nanobots. It would be like millions of nanobots, and they're usually used to provide maintenance for space stations, but these nanobots have become separated from the main nanobots which they usually work with. They've fallen through time to 1550 England, and due to being separated from the main nanobots, they are without command. So they've gone a bit insane, and they are just killing humans because they don't really know what their protocol is anymore. So as I said, this episode would be a bit of a breather after the previous two-parter, and it would be dedicated, quite a set portion of this episode would be dedicated to the Doctor trying to highlight to Jar Jar that, you know, she's not coping with her grief and she's taking stupid risks, and she needs to kind of face the fact that Daniel is not coming back. Now, the swarm would actually be defeated through a sonic ray which would disrupt the nanobots with communicating with one another. So it would basically short circuit them, so then they would be defeated. But yeah, Swarm is supposed to be a bit more of a breather. You know, there is a threat there, but quite a lot of the episode would be the Doctor trying to help Jar Jar cope with her grief a bit more. Now, episode 7, I've chosen to call it The Reality of Dreams, and I've introduced a character from the Sarah Jane Adventures, the Trickster. Now, the Trickster, I think, is a fantastic villain, a villain which really should have made more appearances in the Doctor Who universe. So basically, the main purpose of this episode is the Trickster trying to get Jar Jar to agree to a contract which would say that instead of Daniel being killed in the opening episode, it would be the Doctor instead. So of course this really would take Jar Jar's grief to another level, because she's being given an opportunity here to change her mind, to change time. And the trickster tries to do this by putting Jar Jar in a dream world where she's still got Daniel in her life, like Daniel is alive. And the Doctor would be trying to break through the barriers of the trickster's dream and kind of show Jar Jar that, you know, this would not actually be a good thing, because if the Doctor, of course, died, then loads of planets throughout time and space would be put at risk. So this would be a very personal episode for Jar Jar. It would be showing how she's been given a choice here to either accept her husband's death or allow the Doctor to take his place instead. And also, I think it could lead to a few arguments between Jar Jar and the Doctor as well, because the Doctor is still feeling guilty. You know, he still feels that he was responsible for Daniel's death. So I think that could cause some tension between both of them. And I think it would also show how powerful the trickster is and how manipulative he is. And would just show that the trickster has so much potential to go up against the Doctor. And maybe even get on the same level as the Daleks and Cybermen in terms of, you know, how much of a difficult threat he is to face. Now, episode 8 is the start of another two-parter, and I've called it House of the Dead. Now, the main thing about this two-parter is it would reintroduce the characters of Clyde Langer and Rani Chandra, because I think that Clyde and Rani really have the potential to be kind of the Doctor's allies on Earth. They could be two characters who the Doctor would go to kind of help with Earth-based threats quite regularly. So basically, in this episode, Clyde and Rani, Jar Jar and the Doctor have all gone to investigate the supposedly haunted Redwood Mansion. Now, obviously the Doctor doesn't believe in ghosts, and neither do Clyde and Rani, because obviously Sarah Jane never believed in ghosts herself. But the main threat is that Redwood Mansion has been haunted since 1920, when an entire party appeared to commit suicide. Ever since then, those who have occupied the mansion have taken their own life. However, the real cause of the deaths is an alien parasite which feeds on an individual's worst fear, and that eventually leads to the individual becoming so scared that they take their own life, because that's the only thing they can see, the only way they can see to get out of being scared. Now, the episode would be set in the present day. It would be quite creepy in tone and inspired by horror films. The episode would end on a cliffhanger as the Doctor and Rani head back to 1920 to see how these events started when the parasite took its first victims, leaving Clyde and Jar Jar in the present to kind of face down this parasite at its full power in the present day. Now, the second part of this two-part, I've called it Party of the Living, because the Doctor and Rani have gone back to 1920 to see Redwood Mansion holding this massive party where the first owner committed suicide. And in the present day, Jar Jar and Clyde are forced to confront their worst fears as the alien parasite pushes them further and further to the edge. Now, by travelling back in time, the Doctor and Rani would discover that the parasite was brought into the mansion in a form of hibernation. So the owners didn't actually know what this parasite is. And while the Doctor and Rani are unable to save the party guests, they would be able to learn the weaknesses of this parasite in order to defeat the creature in the present day. And basically how they are able to do that is you starve the creature. If you stand up to your worst fears and show that you are not scared, then that would weaken the creature, because obviously it feasts on fears. That is its food. Now, the themes of this episode would be, you'd split the Doctor and Jar Jar up. So Jar Jar kind of has to work on her own with Clyde in order to overcome the parasite in the present day. I think Jar Jar and Clyde would be able to relate to one another, because obviously Jar Jar's lost her husband and Clyde would still be grieving the death of Sarah Jane Smith. So I think that would be a nice way to kind of pay a tribute to the character of Sarah Jane Smith as well, who never really got a proper conclusion to her death from the Sarah Jane adventures. And the ending of the episode would see the Doctor say some touching words to Clyde and Rani about how proud Sarah Jane would have been with them. And it would also kind of leave the door open for Clyde and Rani to return in the future. Now, episode 10, I've decided to call Androids of the Cavaliers, and it would be another historical episode. I like historical episodes. Now, the Doctor and Jar Jar would land in the midst of the English Civil War in 1648, and they would find themselves face to face with Charles I. Sorry. Now, Charles I, by 1648, was losing the English Civil War. The parliamentarians had the advantage. The Roundheads were very close to winning. So the Doctor is shocked to learn that Charles I is using androids to win the war. Now, basically, these androids have crash-landed on Earth, and they take authority, they take instructions from the nearest source of authority. And because Charles I is the King of England, he is the nearest authority they find. And Charles I doesn't want to die. He doesn't want to lose this war because he believes that the monarch, is God's representative on Earth, and he has the authority to do what he likes with England. So he decides that he's going to use these androids to defeat the parliamentarians. Now, this episode would basically be the Doctor trying to persuade Charles I that, his fate is to die. That he can't use these androids. He has to accept his fate. By doing that, the Doctor kind of reveals that the monarchy will survive long after he has gone, and he's just got to accept his fate. So Charles I would be quite a complex character. He'd be a character who is trying to basically use desperate measures in order to save his own life and to save what he considers is the natural political order where the monarch reigns supreme. And obviously the Doctor would have to try and persuade him that that is not how it works, and he has to accept his fate. The androids, I would have them kind of not really be the villains. They're just following orders at the end of the day. It's more that they're being used by Charles I, to end the parliamentarians. So yeah, I just have this as a more laid back historical episode. Episode 11 I've called Judoon's Most Wanted. Now, this would be the final episode before the 2-part finale, so it'd be quite a more laid back episode. And this would basically be the Doctor and Jar Jar. They're set up by an intergalactic criminal who has stolen one of the most valuable diamonds in the universe. And they have to try and retrieve the diamond and prove their innocence while they are being chased down by a force of Judoon who are determined to capture them. Now, the intergalactic criminal would be a shapeshifter who is unable to be detected by any form of technology. So the Judoon would also feature in this episode, as they wrongly think that it's the Doctor and Jar Jar who have stolen this diamond. So it would be more light-hearted and comedic in tone. It would be like a chase episode where, the Doctor and Jar Jar have to try and track down this shapeshifter in order to prove their innocence while the Judoon are hot on their tail. So it'd be a more laid-back episode, a more comedic episode, a bit more light-hearted in tone. And obviously, this would just be about the Doctor and Jar Jar trying to prove their innocence. Otherwise, the Judoon are going to kill them. Now, we're heading into the 2-part finale. And the first part I've called Eudemon. Now, Eudemon, if I'm pronouncing that right, which I don't think I am, is a defence system which has been developed by the Blue Water Organisation as a modern defence system for the UN. Now, the name Eudemon comes from the Greek mythology, and it refers to a good spirit which watches over humanity. So the idea that this defence system is in space, watching over the human race. Now, the UN considered this system a breakthrough, as it has the ability to track down potential global threats and wipe them out as quickly as possible, though questions, of course, are raised over how destructive it is and whether, if it ever fell into the wrong hands, it could actually prove to be a threat to humanity. Now, the Doctor and Jar Jar have been called back to Earth by UNIT because this intergalactic defence system is preparing for launch, and it needs to be approved by the United Nations. So the Doctor is against the idea of a defence system, so UNIT have called him in to kind of persuade the UN that this isn't a good idea. So a lot of the episode will actually be based around the Doctor being at the UN and trying to kind of persuade the delegates there that this system is not the right move. But obviously all his efforts are in vain because the UN give it their approval and the Eudemon system goes up into space and it's operational. But the twist is that the Blue Water Organization, which developed the Eudemon defense system, is secretly operated by the Sea Devil Anir, who survived from the Sea Devil two-parter earlier in the series. And he's been plotting since his colony was destroyed in 1988 to destroy humanity. So he's managed to infiltrate this Blue Water Organization and develop this defense system, and then he intends to use that to take revenge on humanity. So yeah, that would be the cliffhanger for this episode. The fact that Eudemon is now operational and Anir intends to use it for his own ends. Now, the finale of this series would be titled Countdown to Extinction. Now, the plot of this episode would be that the Eudemon defense system is being reprogrammed to target all humans, and the Doctor has basically less than an hour to prevent Anir from fulfilling his twisted quest for revenge. So the Doctor and Jar Jar would rush to Anir, who is safely protected in an underwater base, and in a desperate attempt to peacefully resolve the threat before the human race faces extinction. So Anir would actually be a sympathetic villain, because obviously in the Sea Devils two-parter he was a young Sea Devil. So now that he's a lot older, he has become consumed with grief over the loss of his family. And this is where Jar Jar comes in, because Jar Jar can relate to Anir because she herself has been consumed with grief over the loss of Daniel. So it would not actually be the Doctor who is able to persuade Anir to not use this system. It would actually be Jar Jar who's finally able to persuade Anir that this is not the right thing and he should just stop this. Getting revenge is not the answer. However, despite the fact that Anir manages to call off the Eudemon defense system, the UN authorises a missile strike on Anir's lair, which results in his death as the Doctor is only able to save Jar Jar before the base explodes. So, kind of Anir's fate is very similar to how his colony, in the sense that because humanity is not prepared to negotiate with them, they choose to destroy them instead. So Anir, even though he was persuaded that he needs to cope with his grief in a different way and taking revenge is not the answer, he would actually be destroyed by humanity anyway. So it kind of raised that moral question of whether Anir was right, you know, whether humanity has actually got any goodness in it, or whether, you know, they just can't be negotiated with whatsoever. So the conclusions from this series, it would be, having seen what grief can do to an individual in the form of Anir, by the end of the series, Jar Jar would finally realise that she needs to process the death of her husband Daniel in order to move on. So Jar Jar decides that she needs some time in the real world to reflect on the last few months. So she would stay behind in the present day rather than continue travelling with the Doctor. Though she makes it clear, you know, that he shouldn't be a stranger, which kind of leaves the door open for her to return in the future. Before leaving, Jar Jar would ask the Doctor to do one more thing for her. Using the TARDIS, the Doctor takes Jar Jar to Niagara Falls, where she finally has the courage to scatter Daniel's ashes over the same waterfall where he proposed to her. So that's how the series would end. It would end on quite a positive and optimistic note, as Jar Jar has finally started to move on from Daniel and kind of accept that he's not coming back. And the Doctor's guilt would also start to lower because he's been able to help Jar Jar in a positive way move on with her life. So that's how the Green series would conclude. But obviously, it doesn't stop there. I've also planned a Christmas special as well. Now, I would call this special the Christmas Hero. And basically, this episode would kind of be in the same style as like the 1960s Spider-Man animated series, in terms of that like very comic bookish world, which kind of doesn't feel like it exists in the real world. It kind of feels like a comic book. So this episode would be heavily inspired by comic books. So basically, the Doctor finds himself in a strange version of London, and it's protected by a masked superhero known as the Red Squirrel. And basically, the Red Squirrel is a masked vigilante who has become a hero to the people of London. Behind the mask, he is Michael Ferner, who works by day as a shop assistant. So the Doctor is very intrigued by this strange world where a superhero exists, and he can't really put his finger on if this world is real or not, because it seems to be straight out of a comic book. Now, in reality, as the episode goes on, the Doctor realises that the real Michael Ferner is actually a terminally ill man from the future. He has been placed in suspended animation by his family to prevent his death. And while in suspended animation, technology has enabled Michael to create an idolised world in his mind, whereby he is a superhero protecting the people of London. So Michael Ferner in real life was a very socially awkward individual. He never felt like he achieved anything with his life, which is why he was so attached to comic books, and especially superheroes like Spider-Man and Batman, because they were strong characters who did something to help protect the people they loved. So this is why in his dream world, he's made himself a superhero, because this is kind of the idealized version of what he wishes he could have done with his life. Now, the Doctor and Red Squirrel have to team up to defeat a new villain known as the Parasite. Now, the Parasite is actually the embodiment of a virus which has infected the machines keeping Michael alive and is slowly killing him. So it'd be a race against time for the Doctor to kind of save Michael Ferner from this computer virus, where although he has to kind of do it through teaming up with Ferner's kind of superhero incarnation, the Red Squirrel, to defeat this villain known as the Parasite. So it would be a kind of out there Christmas special, and I'm probably not explaining it as clearly as I would, but it would be heavily inspired by comic books, and it would be more light-hearted. It would just be a bit of fun for people at Christmas. So there we go. That is the Green series. This is the Doctor Who series which I planned. It took me about 10 months to do. And it's not perfect, I know that. And I know I've probably waffled on a bit. I do apologise for that. But I just thought it'd be a bit of fun, to kind of show, what I would do with Doctor Who if I ever got the opportunity to do it. Please feel free to let me know what you thought of this. Or even what you would do with Doctor Who. If you were appointed showrunner of Doctor Who tomorrow, what would you do with the show? So anyway, I really do hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like, comment and subscribe in order to receive great and maybe even improved quality content in the future. And I will see you in another one. See ya!